Welcome back. So today we have with us Aws Albarghouthi. Aws is an associate professor of computer science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's also a scientist at Aws, or AWS. He received his PhD from the University of Toronto. Aws loves automated verification and program synthesis and thinks that they will save the world. He has applied verification and synthesis to a broad range of topics, including machine learning, robotics, privacy, quantum computing, and beyond. Aws says that he's super excited to be at PLMW, and today he's going to talk about some uncertainties in his academic career and how he has navigated through some of them.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Everyone's good? All right, yeah. So when the organizers invited me, thanks to them, of course, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. When they invited me, they sent me the following email. It said, the goal of the talk is to raise awareness on mental health issues. And I read that and I was like, me? Like mental health? Like, I have nothing to say about mental health. Like, I can maybe tell you how to ruin your mental health, but nothing positively how to deal with it. And I was like confused. Like, I had to check, who is this email addressed to? Like, is it addressed to me, or is it like they're looking for an expert? And to my horror, it was actually addressed to me. And, but then, the next part of the email said, of course, you are much welcome to pick your own topic of interest. And I was like, I can talk about whatever I really want. So, my love is, again, static program analysis. And the best way to do static program analysis is abstract interpretation. So let's start with the very basics. This is a joke. We're not going to do this, yeah. But I mean, ultimately, we all know what a Galois connection is, and this is not what this talk is about. Let's see. Oh, there we go. No, seriously, when I got that email, I started to reflect upon my own journey from being a graduate student, and being an assistant professor, then being, a tenured professor, and I identified like one recurring theme, and I didn't know how to put my, my hand on it. Like, is it? And what I thought about is, I think it's uncertainty. Right? That's how I defined it. And if you look at the dictionary, if you check Wikipedia, or if you ask ChatGPT, what you will get is something like lack of knowledge or predictability. That's the definition of uncertainty that's out there. Okay? But I'm going to strengthen this definition a little bit. After all, I'm a formal methods guy, so I love definitions. They have to be tight. You can't let anything go. So I'm going to strengthen it a little bit. And the reason I'm going to strengthen it, because I wanted to identify with the nuances of human psychology, or at least my psychology myself. So specifically, I'm going to say there's no clear path to acquiring the knowledge. So not only do you not have the knowledge, you don't know how to get the knowledge. Right? So there's two layers to it. It's sort of like there's a lack of agency. Like, I can't do anything about it. Yeah? So let me give you an example. Like this morning, I did not know how to get to PLDI. I did not know how to get to this hotel. I'm not staying in this hotel. Okay? So lack of knowledge. Right? But I had the tools to acquire that knowledge. Could have checked Google, could have asked a local, could have looked for some nerds with name badges and followed them. It was easy, right? But imagine if I woke up this morning and I did not know where PLDI was, and I had none of those tools. It would have been scary. I would have felt lost. I would have been like, I need to get to the stock, and the organizer would have been freaking out, and it would have been a mess, right? So really, like the way I think of uncertainty, it's kind of a lack of bearing, right? You're lost, and you don't know what to do. And when you're lost, it's frustrating, it's scary, but can also be a great time of exploration and discovery. Let me give you another example of why I think this definition is a good one for uncertainty. I mean, if you think about it, humanity has devised like so many ways to tackle those two questions. We have religion, we have philosophy, we have the sciences, right? So for example, some religions address the lack of knowledge by giving us a very clear story of what comes before and what comes after. Other religions, and perhaps modern interpretations and forms of meditation, address uncertainty by targeting the lack of knowledge or predictability and helping us live with it. They'd be like, we don't know what's going on, but we have to cope with it and live with it and be one with it. Science, on the other hand, does not provide us knowledge right away. It provides us a path, not necessarily a clear path, but a path towards acquiring and systematizing knowledge. Okay? But this talk is not about the existential questions of life. this talk is about my own journey with uncertainty in my scientific career. And it's not meant to be an advice talk, like take this and go with it. It's really just, my hope here is for some of it maybe will resonate with you today, some of it maybe will resonate with you in the future. Okay? All right. So let's start at the very beginning, right? The year is 2008. The city is Toronto, Canada. And it's late August, early September, the end of summer in Toronto. And it's a really magical time. It's the kind of magic that you can only get at a place that experiences a long and harsh winter. Right? And I've just arrived there. I'm barely 21, head full of hair, and yeah, and I'm really excited to immerse myself in computer science research. Right? So, first thing is orientation week. And in orientation week, I got to meet all these graduate students who had come from all over the world and all over the country, from the US, from Canada, from Europe, from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, and it was just incredible. I was like, wow, all these people came from all around the world to be with me, to study computer science. That's amazing, right? And I was like in nerd heaven. And and then I remember the first meet and greet with the professors, and it was what is now called the PL and software engineering group. And I was talking to all these professors, and I was talking to the existing graduate students, and I was over the moon. I was like, wow. I called my parents right after, and I was like, everything is amazing. Everyone is awesome. I love it here. Right? Then the semester started. And all the good stuff that you get at the CS department. We had the classes, we had the talks, we had the seminars, we had the the graduate student mixers. We were going out and having fun, and it was exhilarating, right? And I was housed in this beautiful office, which the PL group still lives in the Bayhin Center in Toronto. Very startup-like office, very energizing. And I was surrounded by all these incredible graduate students, the second and third and fourth year. And because it was September, they were all coming back from internships, from Microsoft Research, from NASA, and it seemed like each and every one of them, had something going on. Like one of them was writing a paper, one of them was traveling to some, exotic country to present a paper, one of them was coming back from a country after presenting a paper, and I was looking at them in awe. And I was like, wow, how can I be like those people? For me, they were just a completely different level, and I was lost. I was just barely 21, right? And that was, my first brush with uncertainty. I was like, how do I do research? I'd come to graduate school to do research, but I had no clear idea of what research involved. I did not know what research is. Of course, I had seen papers, I'd read papers, but I did not know what the process of research was like. And I was looking at those students, and I was like, I want to get there, but I just don't know how to become like them, right? So I did not have the knowledge of research. That's number one, lack of knowledge. And I did not have a clear path to acquiring that knowledge. Now, of course, I had a guide, which is my advisor, Marcia Chechik. So she gave me a bunch of papers to read, and I was reading them. And I was understanding them. I had, the mathematical maturity to understand what I was reading. I was looking at, algorithmic verification. And, but I had no clue how to go from reading the papers, reading the existing knowledge, to constructing new knowledge, right? I just did not, I could not bridge this gap. I did not see what's going on, right? And I remember, one of my first meetings with Marcia in September, right? And I asked the most naive question ever, which is hilarious. And I always think about it, and I'm embarrassed by it. We were sitting in her office. I'm sitting in the guest chair, and she's across of her desk. And we're having a technical discussion about one of the papers I was reading. And then towards the end, she's like, well, what else should we talk about? I was like, oh yeah, when do I write a paper? And and notice that I used the word when, not how. Because I was looking at all these students and they're writing papers. I was like, my time is going to come anytime now, right? And Marcia, in all her wisdom, just leaned forward and smiled, and she said, "When you have something interesting to say." And I keep thinking about that, and at that point, I did not have anything interesting to say. At least I could recognize that, right? I did not have anything interesting to say. And I was feeling lost, right, as a result. I wanted to have something interesting to say, but I had no clear path towards that. And feeling lost, is an extreme situation. You don't want to be lost, right? No one wants to be lost. But extreme situations lead to extreme reactions. And my reaction was to just immerse myself in the research, right? I was like reading papers, watching talks, going to talks, reading books, talking to students, looking at PhD theses, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just like doing all this stuff. And I was going and going and going and coming up with ideas and iterating on those ideas and talking to my advisor and talking to students and iterating and trying and iterating and trying. And the key word here is iterating, because research is ultimately, it's not a linear process, right? And you have to keep refining and refining and refining. But I just did not know where I was going. I would come up with stuff, but I had no clue where I was going. I was on this like beautiful trail of math and algorithms and logic, but I just did not know what to look for on this trail. So I was feeling, quite lost. All right. So this kind of uncertainty of what is interesting, like I did not have the taste for the interesting, right? And persisted for the first couple of papers. But I had a guide, and the guide was my advisor. But my advisor ultimately was, a closed box oracle, right? Full of, insights and knowledge and heuristics developed over the years, right? And I can't just like look into that oracle and take all that knowledge in one shot. My only interface to that oracle was I would give it my current state of research, and it would output a next step for me to do, like run more experiments, prove this theorem, make this algorithm fast, and maybe at some point the oracle would tell me, you have something interesting to say, go write it up, right? So I understood that my job was to keep querying this oracle until I could build my own oracle inside of my head, right? So that part I understood, but I still did not know how many times should I query this oracle until I get there. So again, the uncertainty persisted. I would say for the first couple of papers, I was just like churning, but not knowing where I was going. And then later, as a graduate, as a faculty member, I tried to work with my graduate students to help them with their own uncertainty. Because for them, I am a closed box oracle, right? And they would come to me with, like, let's say, experimental results. And I would be like, run more experiments, run more experiments. And the process might go for weeks and months. And for them, it looks like I'm a madman. I just keep telling them to do more stuff, right? Like, what's the end, right? And I try to explain that ultimately there are things that I cannot necessarily be able to explain. I try to explain the things that I know, or like that have rationale to them. But ultimately, it's an exploration process, right? And we have heuristics, and I have developed my own heuristics. And they're trying to kind of develop their own heuristics by querying me. Anyways, long story short, at some point, I had something interesting to say. And I was told, go write it up. And that's when the next uncertainty came about. How do I write a paper? Now I have something interesting. How do I write a paper? I read, of course, tons of papers, but I did not know how to write a paper. Right? I did not have that knowledge. And I did not have like a clear path towards acquiring that knowledge, right? Like there's no like, do these 3 exercises every morning and you'll be writing PLDI papers by the summer, right? Like there's none of those. Like there's a lot of like how to get 6-pack abs by the summer. None of them how to write a PLDI paper by the summer. I don't know why. So I was kind of, again, I was in this limbo. And so what did I do? Well, same thing I did before. I immersed myself in the process. Specifically, we were submitting to a conference called CAV, Computer Aided Verification. And what did I do? I just printed out all the CAV papers I could print. And I had a stack of CAV papers this big. And I remember sitting in a coffee shop in Toronto on a couch and just going through each and every paper, right? Just like trying to understand how are these papers written, right? Like I was just trying to understand the structure. Like what's the first sentence of the abstract? What's the second sentence of the abstract? How does the conclusion look like? How do they present the results? How does the algorithm look like? And it's incredible thinking about it right now, like how foreign a paper was to me. The structure of a paper, it was like completely foreign. Now it's second nature. So I was treating my mind like a large language model, and I was just fine-tuning it on these CAV papers at a coffee shop. And at some point, I fine-tuned it enough that I decreased the uncertainty to a point where I could start writing myself. And then, I started writing. And I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I came up with a paper. The paper got accepted, and on and on and on. So that was my experience in, oops, something happened? It's back, cool. That was my experience in graduate school. But one thing I want to touch upon here is that the uncertainty in personal life can also affect your life as a researcher, as a scientist, as a student. And I'm going to give you one story from my own life that did affect me. So in my third year, in 2011, I went for an internship at Microsoft Research in Bangalore, in India, in particular. And I had a wonderful time. I met all these amazing friends that I'm still in contact with. Actually, the other day, I messaged one of them because he knows about Copenhagen. He gave me some great advice. And I made some, my managers there became lifelong mentors. I actually published my first PLDI paper out of that internship. It was just an amazing time. But in my first few weeks at Microsoft, I got sick. I got like cold and flu symptoms. I had a fever, I had chills, I was feeling cold. I went to the doctor. They did some blood tests, and they're like, looks like you have an infection. It's likely typhoid. Here's some medicine. He gave me the medicine, and my fever subsided, so I thought I was getting better, but I simply did not get better. Right? I just had, constantly was fatigued. I had chills. I was like feeling cold all the time. And I had the funniest thing ever called restless leg syndrome. Does anyone know what restless leg syndrome is? As the name suggests, you just have the urge to move, right? So I'm tired, and I have this like relentless urge to move. It's like if a comedian were was coming up with a disease or a medical condition, they would totally pick that like as the #1 symptom for their comedy show. So I had like this, so I was in my, in the internship, I was writing some OCaml code, and I would just get this, urge to move, and I would start moving. And the office was too small at the time, so I would just go to the roof. Hence, the roof. This is the roof of Microsoft Research, the old building. I realized when I'm preparing this talk that I have just so many pictures from the roof because I was on the roof for so long. And all throughout the internship, I had this persistent, of course, uncertainty, which is, what is wrong with me, right? I did not know what was wrong with me, so lack of knowledge, and I had no clear path to acquiring that knowledge. It seemed like even the doctors didn't know. I kept going to the doctor, more tests. Everything looked normal. I was fine. And then I went back to Canada. My internship was over, and went to the doctor there. And again, they looked at all my tests, and they did some more tests. And they're like, look, everything is fine. But from your test, it looks like you got a viral illness at some point. You're recovered. And these are the post-viral symptoms. Kind of like long COVID, where you get COVID, you recover from COVID, and you just have this long time with symptoms. So I was feeling miserable for a pretty a long time. But the symptoms would continue to subside until, I would say, the end of my graduate student career. But it was a really tough time. Ultimately, the uncertainty took up a lot of mental space. It's not really the physical toll of the symptoms. They weren't that bad. I was just feeling cold and fatigued and so on. But I could do work. But it's really just the mental space that it took was just enormous, right? Because I did not know what was wrong with me. And it looked like no one knew what was wrong with me. So I think in retrospect, if I did not have that episode with the infection, I would have probably been infinitely happier and maybe twice as productive as I would have been otherwise. So that's how your personal life, of course, can affect your career as well, your scientific career. All right, so back to grad school. During grad school, I did not know what I wanted to do. So I did not think of the problem much. Like, do I want to do industry? Do I want to do academia? What do I want to do? But then towards the end, my heart was set on academia. And I don't know why. But I think in retrospect for two reasons. One, I always had I always wanted to be at the forefront of knowledge, right? Like I wanted to know more than anyone else. And academia was kind of the right place to be there. I also had a lot of ideas, right? By the time I was about to graduate, I'd accumulated a lot of ideas. So it was about, and academia was the right place to hire a lot of students and have them work on many different things. So my heart was set. And I was like, I'm going to do academia, and I'm going to become a professor. And I did not consider any other option. In fact, I was getting like calls from this Google recruiter. And I was like, hello, no, I'm going to become a professor. Thank you very much. Boop. And it's over. Okay. So what did I do? I prepared my applications. If you don't know how the academic job market works, usually it works like this. In November, you submit applications to the various universities that have postings available. And then in January and February, you start getting interviews. So I prepared all my application materials, sent them out in November, and then the wait began. Specifically, I sent out 30 applications. I remember I found the spreadsheet from back then. So I sent 30 applications. I was like, I'm going to become a professor, right? So I spammed all the universities that were hiring anything remotely close to pretty much every university is here. In Europe, in US, in Canada, whatever you like. So I submitted all these applications, and then the wait began, and the uncertainty set in, right? Will I become a professor? At this point, I did not know. And at this point, I did not have a clear path. It was completely, I did not have agency at this point, right? Like, applications are out. I couldn't do anything about it, right? All I could do was wait. So the wait was killing me, right? December had passed. Then January began, and nothing, right? Like no emails, no phone calls, nothing. And then some of my friends started getting phone calls and emails and invitations for interviews, and I was like, ooh, looks like I'm not going to get any interviews. And then, end of January, nothing. And then, beginning of February, nothing. And then I get this email from the University of Wisconsin, and it brought me back to life, right? And of course, I still did not know whether I'm going to become a professor. I could just botch the interview. But I had a clear path. I had agency. I had a clear shot on goal. I could try. And that changed my mindset, because it kind of nullified the second part of the uncertainty definition. So I prepared, went, gave a talk, got the offer, and moved to Madison, Wisconsin. And that was the only interview I got. So, moved to Madison, Wisconsin in January of 2015, in the dead of winter, right? And no one had told me that the semester starts on January 20th, and I arrived on the first Monday of January. And it was no one was there, and it was so cold. It was about like minus 20 Fahrenheit, which is equivalent to minus 20 Celsius. It was very cold. So I show up, like no one's there. I go to the department. Thankfully, the department manager was there. I was like, I'm the new professor. He's like, oh, here are the keys. Office is over there. I go to my office. There's a chair. There's a desk. This is the desk that was there. But there was no chair. So I had to go around this building in January when no one is there looking for a stray chair to steal and put in my office. And I was like, wow, what an anticlimactic end to my journey, right? Anyways, so I found a chair, and then the first thing I did was slightly modernize my setup, just a little bit. So I just bought a new desk and a new computer and got going, right? And when I was a graduate student, the foremost uncertainty was, how do I do research? How do I write papers? Like that was my kind of big thing. And then when I started as a faculty member, it was like the fire hose of uncertainty, right? How do I hire students? How do I get money to pay those students? How do I find ideas for students? How do I find good ideas? How do I find many good ideas in case those ones don't work? And how do I keep those students happy? And how do I help them progress with their career? And how do I help them to teach them to write and read and present and on and on and on. It was like an infinite list of things. And I'll just cover one of them right now, just for the sake of illustration, which is how do I write grants, right? So to raise money in academia, you have to pay students, you have to raise money. And to raise money, you write grant proposals. Roughly speaking, a grant proposal, at least in the United States, is like 10 to 15 pages of like describing a problem that you want to solve. And you have to write it convincingly that it's a hard problem, it's an interesting problem, and taxpayers should give you money so that you work on that problem. But unlike papers, there aren't even examples online, right? Like people don't share them publicly. They don't put them in the website. So no one could tell me like how to write a research grant proposal, and I'd never seen one before. So I had this new uncertainty. But it was a very similar uncertainty to what I faced as a graduate student. I didn't know how to write papers. Now I was faced with a new one. How do I write grants? Very similar. And my reaction was actually very similar as well. I immersed myself in the process. And I did exactly the same thing like when I was writing a paper. I emailed a bunch of professors that I knew, both at Wisconsin and elsewhere. And I told them, can you please send me examples of research grants that you've written successfully? And they sent me a bunch. And I have printed out a stack this big of research proposals. And I started going through them one by one. Again, training my LLM, fine-tuning it on this stack of proposals, trying to understand what the heck is a proposal, right? Like, what does it even look like? And I kept going and going and going and going until I sort of like extracted a template of sorts, right? And a philosophy. And in fact, actually, I have a physical template, like a LaTeX template that has proliferated at this point. And a lot of proposals look like mine at this point. So one thing I want to point out here is that notice with both like research, with writing papers, and with getting funding, I kind of deployed the same strategy. My brain had developed this funny pattern which said, if you're faced with uncertainty, meaning something that you don't know how to do, immerse yourself completely. Okay? And it worked all the time. Like in this very case, I was going to the office really early in the morning, and as you can see the morning light here, that's why I have this picture. Because I wanted, I did not know how any of these how long any of these tasks would take, right? Like I had to learn how to write grants, I had to prepare my class, and I had to do research simultaneously and do service and hire students and so on. And all of these things were new, and I did not know how much time to allocate to each. And when will I, get to the point where I could write a grant proposal? So I had to like go really early in the morning to do that. But this kind of simple approach of if you're faced with uncertainty, immerse yourself in the work, while it worked for me, I don't think it's particularly optimal or healthy. Since then, I've been kind of more deliberate about it. I've been like, whenever I face uncertainty, I ask myself, how can I break down this task? Is there something better than printing out a stack of proposals and reading them one by one and trying to extract a method in this madness? Anyways. But as a professor, the overarching uncertainty is not how to write grant proposals, is will I get tenure? Right? And let me explain the tenure system for if you have not heard of it. This is true in the US, in Canada, and many places around the world, including some places in Europe. But roughly speaking, you have 6 years of being an assistant professor, right? 6 plus or minus, depends on the place, but 6 is the average, I would say. And then in most research-intensive universities, at the end of those 6 years, you're judged on your research. So they ask for experts in your field to comment on your work and so on and so forth. It's a very rigorous process. And there's 2 outcomes. You either pass and you get tenure, and therefore a job for life at the university, or you fail and you're out. That's it. Right? So it's a scary process, right? And it ultimately hinges on research. And research itself is highly, highly uncertain. Like each step of the way, it's uncertain. Right? So it's a very uncertain process. So let me explain. I'll give you a caricature of what research looks like. Okay? First, you get a good idea. It has to be good and has to be new. Then you develop that idea. Then you publish the results. Very easy. 1, 2, 3, right? But every step of the way is replete with uncertainty. First of all, how do you get a good idea? Actually, what does that even mean? What is a good idea, right? How do you, like, you have to conjure up something out of nothing, right? It feels like you're defying the laws of physics when you come up with a good idea. And then sometimes you have a good idea, and you start developing it, and you realize either it's actually not a good idea after all, or maybe someone had beat you to it, or sometimes you simply do not have the tools to develop this idea further. Maybe it's just ahead of its time. Okay? And then if that happens, you go back to step 1, and you look for a different new idea. Right? And sometimes, you develop your idea, and you're so happy about it, and you submit it for publication. And then ultimately, publishing a paper in a conference like PLDI, it's a social process, right? There's no guarantees, right? Your paper might get rejected, might get accepted. Of course, eventually, good papers get accepted, but there's no physical law that says that good papers will get accepted, right? And there's no social contract. Like, no one essentially will get your paper accepted after some time or anything like that, simply. Okay? So the entire process, and then if it doesn't get accepted, you might have to either resubmit it or develop the idea again, or maybe give it up altogether. So the entire process is replete with uncertainty. But the ultimate uncertainty is at the very top, is getting a good new idea. It feels so daunting, to come up with something new and interesting. And when I was preparing this, I remembered this discussion that I was having with a senior colleague at some point. He's not a PL professor, but he's in a different field, top of his field, senior professor, books, papers, awards, commercial systems, whatever, like all the greatest CV ever, right? And we were talking about the research process and what it's like and coming up with ideas and so on. And he told me something that stuck with me. And he said, like every time I'm done with a paper and I submit it for publication, I get this feeling that I'll never have a good idea again, that I've run out of good ideas. And I was like, wow, you have this professor who's like top-notch, top of his field, like crippled by the anxiety of coming up with a good idea. Anyways, long story short, I got tenure. So yeah, towards the end of my, I would say my 5th year as an assistant professor, it was clear kind of that things were going well, right? So, it was clear that my tenure case, I would say 99% make it. So, I should have been excited, I should have been relaxed, should have been popping champagne, but none of that. It was actually the opposite, A new wave of uncertainty hit me. So, you see, when I was an assistant professor, it's like it's a time trial race. You have 6 years, you have a ticking clock, and and it's like, all right, go do some research, and in 6 years we'll see you and we'll judge you, and you just go, right? Like you make some bets about what problems to solve and what to do within those 6 years, and you just go for it. Like there's no room for thinking or strategizing. You do something that you trust your gut instincts, right? This short amount of time. But now, with tenure, with the job until the end of times, I was faced with this overwhelming task of optimizing my career over a 35-year time frame, right? It's a very unconstrained optimization problem. And unconstrained optimization problems have so many possible solutions and so many possible paths, right? What should I do? And I did not know. And interestingly, when I was thinking about this period of my life, I found this photo. And this photo was taken 2 weeks before the pandemic hit the United States. We were in Seattle for the PLDI PC meeting, the program committee meeting, the last physical one. And then after I took this photo, I went out for a walk with Ishil. I don't know if you remember. She's over there. She's going to be on the panel. You remember? Yeah. We went for a walk, and and I was telling Ishil, like, I don't know what to work on. Like, I don't know what to do, right? So, the unexamined life, as Socrates told us, is not worth living, right? So I was re-examining my life. Okay? And I was facing this deep uncertainty, which is like, what should I do? and I did not know what to do. And what I realized, at least in retrospect, is that I needed to define what my values were as a researcher. Right? Like, what was I optimizing for? Right? And was I like optimizing for deep and beautiful mathematical results? Was I optimizing for societal impact? Was I optimizing for educational impact? Or was I optimizing for academic, industrial impact? And of course, you're never optimizing for one of these things and only one. You're optimizing for a weighted sum. And my task was to find the weights to assign to all these possible values. So that's how I went about it. I was reading books and talking to people like Ishel and others to try to understand, to find what are my values. I did not know that. And I had no clear path of necessarily acquiring it. There's no, there's no universal philosophy of life, right? And there's no universal philosophy of how to live your life as a researcher. But I went about it, and I kept searching and searching and searching for my values. Now you could say, come on, like, are you saying like you never thought about your values as a graduate student or as a tenure track professor? And I'm like, no, of course, I had values, and I had guidelines, and I had principles, and I had interests and curiosities that guided me in my research process, in my choice of problems, in my advising, and in my teaching. But they were overshadowed by immediate concerns. When I was a graduate student, I was trying to figure out how to become a researcher. So I wasn't thinking this big, grand questions about what am I going to do, for 30 to 40 years or whatever, right? And when I was a tenure track professor, I was in this time trial race, and I had to make, short bets that would pan out within, that are realistic and would pan out within, 5 to 6 years to keep my job. But now with all these constraints gone, the question of what are my values arose to the forefront, and I was facing it firsthand. Right? So what are my values? Well, that'll be PLMW 2025. So with that, my advice is that there's no advice, but you will face uncertainty in your academic career, and may you face it with grace, and may you actually find joy and meaning and beauty in it. And that's it.
Open up the floor for questions. Sure. Any questions?
Yeah.
So I know I'm not one of the PLMW students, but something that I've sort of encountered in your talk here, which was great, and also in the RTFM session this morning, is that a lot of these discussions tend to come from people that are on the other side of that uncertainty. They've succeeded, and so there's always some survivorship bias that comes into maybe the. Can you? And I know it's hard for you to maybe do this on your own, but can you kind of think about maybe your experiences? You're very well connected in the community of like things that other people might have also tried to navigate some uncertainty. I always tell people that, just like you said, uncertainty is the biggest thing that you have to deal with as a researcher. What other approaches might there be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to answer your question. It's a hard question because it's like a counterfactual, right? Like, I mean, I was like on the verge of not becoming a professor, for example, right? Like, I only got one interview and I had to go for it, right? And then I had this choice of like, what should I do? Like, should I look for a postdoc? Should I go to industry? Should I go back to that, how do I go and talk to that Google recruiter again with my head down? And so I don't know. Like, I mean, I imagine these scenarios counterfactually, but I don't know what I would have done in those. I mean, I would have been a different person, and maybe there is a part of me in a quantum multiverse that, yeah, so I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. One question I have is, in the periods of highest uncertainty, how do you recognize where you are in the cycle from the big question, like, how do I write a paper, to, I've done it and I've sort of overcome this hurdle that I was super uncertain about.
Right.
You know, within these, and then you said multiple stages of career.
Right.
How do you identify, you know, the start point and the end point of these uncertainties?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of just like, you know, with statistical uncertainty. If you see enough points at some point, you think you did it. Like in my case, like I think after I wrote the first paper, I thought I was like, I figured it out, right, as a graduate student. But then the second paper was actually harder to write, just because of the topic. And it was kind of back to square one, where I was like, I don't know what I was doing. But then after, so those two, perhaps like those two initial papers, and maybe three, you know, I found a line of best fit that worked well. But you know, it could have been different. Again, maybe I was lucky to find those 3 points and extrapolate from there.